So yeah, tonight we're lucky to have Vajratara join us. Vajratara is one of the youngest members of the college.
I
I
think I
figured
am the
out,
youngest.
are you the youngest?
Yeah.
You are the youngest. So at 46 too, I looked up how old you were. So at 46, and she actually came into the movement at a very early age. She started learning to meditate the South London Center when she was 17 years old. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And then
My
was
mum and dad
ordained
are
with.
here, they can testify.
Oh, right, excellent. And then she got ordained when she was 26.
Hmm.
So it's quite an early age. And she currently lives at Tiratanaloka, and she's been there since 2011. And she's part of the women's ordination team there. And to tell you the truth, she just finished a Transcendental Principle retreat just now. How'd that go?
It was extremely good. Well worth. It's not the easiest language always, the survey of Buddhism, but that's what we study on the Transcendental Principle, and it's well worth it. It's a very, very transformative retreat and very poetic text, actually. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. You've got about 18 like half an hour recordings on YouTube, don't you, on the survey?
Yeah, they're study guides because it's quite a dense text, not always easy to read. They're little introductions to each section, and it just means that people, when they're studying it, can have a little bit of an introduction and a few things to think about. But people have found them very helpful, actually.
Right. And I heard, rumor has it that you basically just took your iPhone and propped it up on a couple books in front of you.
Yeah, I did.
That's great. That's great. You don't need much, do you, these days?
No, exactly. I just did
Yeah.
most of them. I did just straight after leading a study group on that
Right.
material so that my mind was really fresh with it.
Wow. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I've heard good things about those. I haven't listened to them, but we do have a men's retreat on the Transcendental Principle coming up this year, and I think I'll listen to those just as a refresher.
Mm.
So this series is on the perfections, and I guess the idea was that we wanted to give people an opportunity to meet people in the college, but we also wanted to give back and just offer something to the wider movement. So it's difficult times. I mean, there's a lot happening in the world in different places. And so the question kind of really is what does a spiritual community have to offer, wider society, and what sort of response can you give? And so we're going to kind of be exploring that. But tonight we're going to explore it particularly through the topic of ethics, the perfection of ethics. And I guess, Vajratara, we could just hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ratnavyuha. Yeah, so that's the general theme for all of these talks. And it starts with this question: what does a Buddhist order have to offer the world in times of conflict, violence, and environmental destruction? So it's a very, very important question to ask. And in preparation for this talk, I actually went to the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report for 2024, which is quite interesting reading, actually. They take opinions of people, experts in many fields, to put out a list of what they think might happen in 2024. And it highlights the risk in the coming year. And, this is paraphrasing quite a long report, but the two main risks that the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report identifies are the first one is extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation. And the second one is societal polarization, and they have quite a lot to say about societal polarization. They say that the concern is that this will become exacerbated by economic downturn, a loss of economic opportunity, and with that difficulty in economic times, there'll be increasing amounts of misinformation and disinformation. So added to an unstable economic environment is the internet and all the possibilities, the increasing possibilities on the internet. So the cost of living, as we know, for many people around the world, the cost of living is increasing. Inflation is rising along with higher interest rates. And as people start to feel squeezed economically, they look for someone to blame. And now what's happening with the internet is that anyone with any agenda can add fuel to the flame of polarization by saying anything they like to as many people as they like. So the other thing that we've got in 2024 is elections in Bangladesh, India. We've seen the elections happening in India, Indonesia, Mexico, Pakistan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. They're all heading for the elections in the next 2 years. And I suppose the concern is, what information are they basing their votes on? Is what the information that they're receiving true? And is there indeed truth to be known? Is there truth to base a vote on, or is it all opinions? So that's the kind of world that the World Economic Forum is looking at in 2024. The main problems being extreme weather and environmental degradation and societal polarization. So is this new? Well, throughout time, we can see that when there's competition for resources, there's polarization. And when there's polarization, there's conflict. And when there's conflict, there's violence. And where there's violence, there are displaced people. There's people on the move, refugees. So violence is nothing new. We all know that. Armed conflict is nothing new. It happened at the time of the Buddha, and it's happening now. But I think what is new is cyber violence. And this is something that the World Economic Forum's report really goes into, is the potential for cyber violence, particularly with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is capable of an incredible power of destruction based on a superhuman breadth of knowledge unimaginable at the moment. And with that increase of knowledge, the potential for destruction is huge. So the means of destruction is new, and the scale is new. There's global economic implications for any society's actions, and we can see that even on our own everyday level. As some of you know, I live at a retreat centre in Wales called Tiratanaloka, and we've outgrown our premises and are thinking of moving. Well, we are going to move, and we've been thinking about whether we can afford to build. And with the war in Ukraine, building costs in the UK have gone up 40%. So something that can happen quite far away in another place in the world will have an impact on everyone. So our actions are no longer isolated from each other. They're no longer isolated even in a small society. They're linked to a worldwide connected economy and a worldwide technological landscape. So how can a Buddhist order respond to that? Is there a response that we can have as a Buddhist order? Will a Buddhist order help in this world? So the clue comes from a very early story in Buddhism. The story starts with the Buddha. Actually, technically, it's the previous Buddha, but I don't think we'll worry about that. The story is quite famous. It later got ascribed to our current Buddha. But anyway, it starts with a Buddha. And before he's a Buddha, before he's an enlightened being, he's a prince. And he sees old age, disease, and death. And he sees them in the people around him. So this is something that we also see in life. We also see old age, disease, and death on the news and around us. In a way, we've got potential access to much more information than the Buddha ever had. But I think the difference is that we can block ourselves off. You know, sometimes we feel we see so much on the news, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And we cut off our emotions and cut off our way of seeing. But when the Buddha saw these things, when he saw old age, disease, and death, he saw them deeply and he really felt them. It didn't take a lot for him to really think through the implications of old age, disease, and death. He said that other people, when they see those things, they're shocked, humiliated, and disgusted. But when he saw them himself, he realized that he too was subject to old age, disease, and death, that we all are. And for him, that became a very intensive sort of spiritual problem. What was one to do about old age, disease, and death? It wasn't enough for him to just turn away from those things. So in the midst of that questioning, in the midst of that seeing the sort of essential problems of human nature, he saw someone different. He was with his charioteer, as it says in the old texts. We can imagine that in the modern day world, he'd be driving along with his chauffeur. But he looked out and he saw someone quite different. He saw someone mindfully walking down the road. And he just looked utterly different from everyone else. He was completely at peace. And what the Buddha said about the person that he saw is he said, this person lives in truth, truly lives in peace, acts ethically, performs meritorious deeds, is without harm, and truly has compassion for living beings. So that was the impression that he got from this person just by seeing him in the street. And then when he went to talk to him, he realized that all those things were true. I'll say that list again. He lives in truth, who truly lives in peace, acts ethically, performs meritorious deeds, is without harm, and truly has compassion for living beings. And when he sees this person in the midst of old age, disease, and death, he sees this person living in peace, without harm, and with true compassion. He can't go back to his old way of being. He can't go back to his old life. He's seen a vision of something he could become that's utterly different, something he longs for. And he completely changes his way of life. He decides to become like this person that he's seen. So sometimes we call this person, we never find out his name, which I always find interesting. The Buddha never meets him again. He completely changes his whole life on the basis of meeting this person, but we never find out who he is. We just call him the fourth sight. So the first three sights are old age, sickness, and death. And the fourth sight is this wandering man that he sees in the street. So in all the chaos of old age, disease, and death, there's a vision of something different, a different way of living, a different way of being in the world. And the way that Bhante talks about it, Bhante Sangharakshita, who's this person in the painting behind me, if you don't know. He says it's an example of sanity and compassion in the world. And that, in a way, is what the world needs. It needs an example of sanity and compassion. And if we see an example of sanity and compassion in the world, we see a different way of living. And it can lead to this radical shift in the way that we live our lives. So the answer to old age, sickness, death, social polarization, competition for resources, conflict, or great need is a vision of a different way of being in the world. We need to be inspired to make a shift in our own lives. We need to have a vision of who we can become in order to make great changes in our own lives and to become what the Buddhist tradition terms in Pali a silavant. So a silavant is literally a being of ethics, someone who embodies ethical behavior, or as they sometimes translate it, a morally upright person. So sometimes we might think that that a morally upright person might be quite a small thing. In a way, it sounds like a small thing, but I think it's good to remember that it was seeing a silavant, seeing a morally upright person, that prompted even the Buddha to change his whole life, to set out on the spiritual quest and become someone completely different. I don't think we can ever underestimate the impact of a morally upright person, or as Bhante says, an example of sanity and compassion in the world. I think this is needed now more than ever and has deep, deep implications for us as human beings. We have a vision of what is possible. So last month, Nagaketu, I was extremely pleased that he brought in the greatest Buddhist social activist of all time since Emperor Ashoka, which is Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar had some very, very good and important things to say about ethical practice. But what the main thing that he saw that societies all over the world, what they really need is a comprehensive ethical system that people can follow. He made the point that we can't just rely on the law. We can't rely on the law to manage people and resources because the law can't reach everyone. The law relies on the majority of people willingly to keep the law and to punish the few that won't. But what Dr. Ambedkar said is, he said the biggest difference in the world will be a comprehensive moral system, ethical system that everyone can follow. And he also made the point that in the modern world, that ethical system can't be based on a higher judging authority. It can't be based on feeling that there's a higher authority who's going to punish you at death. Because people can just simply choose not to believe it. Generally, people can choose to think that their existence finishes at death. And so from that point of view, they're not going to follow an ethical system that's based in what happens after you die. So Dr. Ambedkar's point was that it has to be a system of natural ethics. So natural ethics is an ethical system that's based on universal human values, values that we all respond to. And that's what Buddhist precepts are based on. Buddhist precepts are based on interacting with others on the basis of loving kindness, generosity, contentment, truthful speech, and awareness or mindfulness. And to sort of borrow an old philosophical question, these things are values not because the Buddha said they were values, the Buddha pointed them out because they're universal values already. They're values that we all respond to. They're based in love, contentment, and wisdom. And those are universal human qualities that we all respond to. And the Buddha gave a series of precepts that reflect our total being, a transformation of body, speech, and mind. And he formulated those into ethical precepts that reflect how we are in the world, in our action, in our speech, and in our mental states. So if you've got those universal values of loving kindness, generosity, contentment, truthfulness, and awareness, if they're all universal values, why don't we follow them all the time? Why don't we all keep them? Why do we need an ethical system at all? Why don't we just listen to our deepest values and follow them? From the Buddhist point of view, there's lots of competing things that are going on in our minds all the time. So there's our human values, what we most truly respect and admire and treasure in ourselves. And then there's also other values that are coming in. There's other competing ideas and pulls. The pulls of craving and aversion are very, very strong. So we need support. We need support to live by our most respected, most cherished values. And the support that we need is a clear principle behind ethics, a method of developing and deepening ethics, and support to do it, to take that practice deeper. So we need a principle, we need a framework on which to reflect on our ethical behavior. And we need that framework to be, in a way, believed by us, understood by us. We need a framework to reflect on our action and a context in which to take it all deeper. So Buddhism really emphasizes the need for clarity about what ethics really are and the principles behind an ethical system. And obviously this is a short talk, and we do a 2-week retreat on ethics at Tiratanaloka, in which we can go into things in a lot more depth. But the main principle behind ethics is a simple but very, very deep and profound practice and truth. And the principle behind all ethical behavior is imaginative identification. Imaginative identification with other living beings. It's the imagination that crosses the chasm between self and other and realizes that people are fundamentally the same as ourselves. We all want to avoid suffering and we all want happiness. We have our hopes and fears, and we feel things deeply. And according to Buddhism, we all have the potential to grow and develop as human beings and to live more in line with our values. And that's true for me, and it's true for you, and it's true for everyone, no matter how old you are, or in what time, or in what culture. And so if we reflect this way, if we have this imaginative identification for other living beings, we have a sort of sensitivity to life, the life in myself as a growing and developing being, and even the life in animals and the world around us. So some of you know that all year round I swim in our river, which is at the bottom of the garden. I can see Kalyana Shri smiling because she knows this place very well. It's a beautiful river, and over the years, I've been living here for 13 years. I've got to know that river very, very well. And even with the river, I realized there's a growing sort of emotional sensitivity. There's a growing imaginative sensitivity with this river. And I feel for that river, and I don't want anyone to pollute it in any way. And I was reflecting on that the other morning, thinking, well, in a way, this imaginative identification with other living beings can also extend further to seeing that everything has a sort of life from its own side, a being from its own side. One of the things that Sangharakshita said is he said, one should see the universe as alive. And he said he finds it very different, or he found it very difficult to think of plastic as alive, but that was his own limitation. So yes, it's very simple. Imaginative identification is the whole of the basis of Buddhist ethics. But though this is very simple, like all the best teachings, it's very difficult to put into practice. It's very easy to think of ourselves as isolated from others, as living in our own world, and to focus inward, thinking that we're cut off and alone, when in fact we're very, very far from it. We're all in this life together. So imagination is the only thing that can leap over divided consciousness. It leaps over divided consciousness and it brings together self and other, my people and your people. It's the only force that is stronger than social polarization. And one of the things that Bhante Sangharakshita said is, he said, we'll only have peace in the world when we see humanity as basically one. Interestingly, if we go back to that fourth sight, to our wanderer wandering down the road in ancient India, when it says he has compassion for all living beings, the word literally is anukampa. In Pali, it's anukampa, which literally means trembling with. So when he says he's got compassion for all living beings, it's not an idea. It's not even really an emotion. It's a literal trembling with all beings. It's a sensitivity to life, the life in himself and the life in others. It's the kind of imaginative identification that resonates deeply with other living beings, that shakes with them, that feels with them. The same word is used when the Buddha became enlightened, and as part of his enlightenment experience, he saw all beings like lotuses emerging from the mud of existence. And he said that when he saw all beings like this, like growing lotuses, very beautiful beings opening into the light, he literally shook with all beings. He had the anukampa, the great compassion, where he shook with all beings. He felt them deeply. It wasn't just an idea or an emotion. It was a transformation of being, a complete fulfillment of imaginative identification. So we need that clear principle behind ethics, something simple, but something that has no limit. It finds fulfillment really in enlightenment itself. So even though it's simple, it has limitless potential. And we need a method to realize it. We need a method to encourage imaginative identification. And that method in Buddhism is meditation, which is a direct way to transform the mind. And it's meditation that can nourish the imagination. And it's important for the world we live in because we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to cross over that divide between self and other. And we have things that will transform our mind. We either have meditation that can transform our mind, or our minds will be transformed by technology, particularly. And technology itself can be a force for disintegration, or it can be a force for integration. We've seen in the lockdown that technology can be a force to bring people together or push people apart. And it's meditation itself that can work on the mind, that can dissolve distinctions in the mind, and enable us to use the tools that we have at our disposal, like the internet, to bring people together. all the time we're faced with choices. We're faced with competing values. Do we, for example, this is a choice that I've had to make recently. Do I take the train or do I go on a short flight? Do I concentrate on the environment or my own finances and my own stress levels? Do I take time out to help a friend? How do I respond to that difficult email or text message? There's always choices to make, and it's meditation that enables us to have a bit more space in that, to have a bit more time to slow everything down so that we're more aware of what choices we make and on what basis we make those choices. They're very, very difficult decisions, and we don't always get things right. But I think what imagination does is it enables us to cut through a whole long train of reasoning. We go back to our own being, even somatically, we go back to our own being, how we feel, what we're thinking. And then we take into account others. We feel the life in others and we feel the life in ourselves. And we imagine our way into the life of others. We imagine ourselves into different worlds, into the world of others. And it also makes sense in a way of what happens when we do make the wrong choice. I think we have to allow ourselves in life to make the wrong choices sometimes. And sometimes we feel remorse. We feel remorse because we didn't act in line with our values. You know, we've got our values of truthfulness, of contentment, and of love. And sometimes, and our imaginative connection with other living beings. And sometimes that kind of imaginative force and our own values comes into contact with our actual behavior, which isn't in line with those values. And at that point, we might feel some remorse. Maybe we didn't use our imaginative faculty fully enough. So sometimes that will happen as well. I think that's useful when it does, because it gives us our information on who we want to be in the world. So I think also imaginative identification can help us find our way in the post-truth society, as it's known. So this is the society which is not, is in a way, we're sort of starting to lose our faith in having an objective reality, in having a standard of truth. We live in a society when there's so much information, it's very, very difficult to know what is true. And sometimes there's not even a value placed on telling the truth. So imaginative identification can help us find our way in a post-truth society. We have so much information, we don't know what to believe and on what basis we're supposed to believe anything. And when we feel like that, we tend to conform to our own biases. So we find the information that we want that confirms our own biases, to confirm what we already think and feel. And actually, that wasn't unknown to the Buddha himself. I think the means are different nowadays, but that question of how do we know what to believe was actually put to the Buddha when he was alive. It was asked, with so many opinions competing for our attention, how do we know what it is that the Buddha himself would say is true? How do we know what the Buddha himself would teach? And he made a very interesting point with this. He said, if it leads to simplicity of life, then it's truth. If it leads to complexity and craving, it's not. And he says, if it leads you to delight in violence, it's not the truth. And if it leads you to delight in beauty, it is the truth. So I think we can take that to heart when we're faced with so much information and we're deciding what we believe, just to really reflect, is this enabling me to delight in beauty and connection and imaginative identification with other living beings? Or is it leading me to delight in violence and social polarization and the separation between self and other? And again, this isn't a worked out theory. It's not a list of sort of intellectual criteria of what's true and what isn't. It's an emotional reflection. It's that reflection of imaginative identification with other living beings. Does it bring beings together or does it pull people apart? If it pulls people apart, it's not the truth. And if it brings people together in beauty, it is the truth. So we've got our principle of imaginative identification, and we've got our method, which is meditation. But we also need support from other people to practice ethics. We support each other in our ethical practice and in deepening our imaginative identification. We talk to each other about our ethical practice. We talk to each other about the choices that we're making. We talk to each other about the feelings of remorse that might arise. There's too many forces against us to be able to sustain an ethical practice alone. We need the support of others. We need to talk it through, talk about our choices, talk about our regrets. But more than that, we need people who are further along the path than we are, who embody ethics, embody that morally upright character more than us, to give us a way forward, to exemplify something that we can follow. And even when we're in the presence of those people, we can find that our ethical standard raises. I've definitely found that in my life. I think it's very, very significant for me when I was training for ordination to come to the place where I'm now living, Tiratanaloka, and have really extraordinary women in my life who I felt were much further along the path than me and who helped me, supported me and encouraged me. People like Kalyanashri and Ratnatarani who are here. And just showed me that a different way of being was possible and believed in me. They believed that I could do that in the world. There is no limit to my gratitude for the experiences that I've had from order members who are further along the path than I have. They've shown me a different way of being in the world. And they've believed in me. And I think having confidence in each other as ethical beings is a gift that is beyond value. So, in conclusion, what does a Buddhist order have to offer the world in times of conflict, violence, and environmental destruction? It offers a clarity on a system of natural ethics. It offers a method of deepening our ethical sensitivity, and it offers us support to do it. And maybe this is an idealistic aspiration, but I like to think that also the order becomes a fourth sight in the world, an example of a different way of being in the world, an example of what it's like to live in the world in truth, truly living in peace, acting ethically, performing meritorious deeds without harm, and having true compassion for living beings. It's interesting because the Pali term for living in truth in this extract from the Pali Canon is actually Dharmacharya. And that, of course, is the name for an order member, a Dharmacharya or a Dharmacharini, means someone who lives by the truth. So I don't think we are always necessarily acting to the standards that we most admire. But I think it's possible. And I think to some extent, that's what we can do in our lives. That's certainly what I hope to do in my life and what I hope to encourage others to do by helping them train for ordination. is to enable us to become examples of sanity and compassion in the world, to live imaginatively beyond social polarization and by bringing together living beings. And what that really means is loving living beings, feeling with living beings, even shaking with living beings, and doing that together to support each other in our ethical practices. And maybe if we can support each other in our ethical practice, there is some hope. There's some hope in the world that we can collectively face the difficulties that are coming. So I'll leave it there. And maybe we'll have a bit more time to reflect and to think about what questions we have and how we'd like to explore what I've just said.
Thank you, Vajratara. That was really wonderful. I love your invocation of the spiritual community as a fourth sight for the world. I think that's really beautiful. So I was a bit flustered at the beginning, so I forgot a few things. One was that there's a Hindi translation available, but Kasajoti got that into the chat, so hopefully everybody would have found that if they needed it. So we've got Amoga City with us, who's been translating, so big thanks to Amoga City for that. The program, what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a tea break, or a bit of a break, but we're going to have breakout rooms. And so you can go into a breakout room and you can, have your tea and chat to people about what you've just heard from Vajratara and kind of maybe talk about different questions you might have or things that you found inspiring. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to make it an option for you, if you've got a question, to email Kasajoti. She's in the chat. She's right up on the top there. So if you go under the 2, well, actually, it's somebody set her as the default. So that's great. So you can chat her a question, and then what we'll do is after the break, Vajratara is going to answer some of those questions for us. So Kasajoti is going to go through and pick some good ones. We probably won't be able to answer all the questions, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. All right, Vajratara. So I think we're gonna start fielding some questions if it's okay with you. Did you get yourself a cup of tea?
I got myself a cup of tea.
Great.
It's a British necessity.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah. Many times during the day. The first question is one that I think is from Kasajoti. And it's basically what she said was, you talked about the importance of the fourth sight, an example of sanity and compassion. Could you share an example of this in your own life that has moved you on the path?
Gosh, it's very, very hard to pick one. I mean, sometimes I think we can look for the big things and miss the little things. So even noticing on retreat, I think Tara's here actually, and Tara was on the last retreat and she hurt herself. And I was deeply moved just by seeing the help that she got from the other retreatants. And I thought, oh no, she's hurt her ankle. She can't go on the top. She was sleeping on the top floor. And before I'd even sort of formulated a request, the whole retreat sort of moved into action and moved her on a lower floor and got all her stuff and set her up in a new room. And I thought that's the kind of thing that is easy to miss. But sometimes there's been other things where, and it's not always Buddhists, there's other things where I've been very moved by people's actions. I remember once actually coming home from my first retreat in Rivendell, sort of south of London, and I came home and I was going through Brixton in South London, and a fight broke out in the street. And I just remember there was a local bus driver, and the bus driver got out of his cab and just went out. And I didn't see what he said because I wasn't near enough, but I just saw his way of being with these two people fighting. And his way of being was just separating them out and talking to them both. And what I really observed about that, I mean, maybe I was very sensitive as well because I'd just come off retreat, but I noticed that he was very, very centered in himself, very, very still. And even though there was a lot of agitation and a great amount of charge, happening around him, he wasn't involved in that kind of charge, if you see what I mean. So thematically, he was very, very still. And he treated both people with respect. There was no shouting going on. There was no sort of exacerbation or further violence. You could see that he was very respectful to both people. So I didn't see what he said. I didn't hear what he said. I just saw somatically how he was with those people. And I was very, very deeply moved. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence and hope that in even a very, very highly charged situation, if one doesn't add further charge and treats everyone with respect, it just diffused the whole thing.
It's a good example too, because I think it's particularly powerful when that sight comes out just in the midst of life, when someone kind of steps out of maybe, they step out of just maybe what would be or wouldn't be their responsibility. The bus driver just kind of pulls over and kind of just involves themselves in that way. It's very inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you'd be allowed to do that anymore. That was in the 90s, but whether it'd be allowed to get out of the bus. But in a way, yeah, I think there's something symbolic as well about you're going along in a particular direction traveling in your own direction, and just to stop that and engage if that is possible. Wouldn't always recommend it, but if that is possible, in a way, we can do that in little ways too. It doesn't have to be a big fight we're breaking up. He was quite a large man. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it, but I wonder if there's little ways where you're heading along in one direction, you just stop and be with people.
Yeah, and you also brought out the importance of meditation as a method of kind of widening that gap in which one can make a choice like that. And I don't think it's always choices, necessarily about, stopping a robber or breaking up a fight. I think there's also choices to, appreciate people and to give them fearlessness and support and courage in times, just everyday stuff. I remember there was a friend of mine who once lost a cat, and she said she was there, she was crying, her cat had died, and she was crying. And somebody came behind her and just placed a hand on her shoulders. And she said that she could just feel the compassion from this person. She never saw the person's face, has no idea who it was. All she knows is just that memory of the hand touching her when she was in major grief. So
I'll give you
all
another.
right.
Well, I
yeah,
just want to
do.
give one other
Yeah.
example, because I think also just this is quite pertinent to the times. Is Kali Chitta started doing this thing that if she saw that someone she knew had written something quite unpleasant online on a social media, Facebook or something, it's very easy to express yourself very strongly on social media because you're not seeing a human being on the other end of it.
Yeah.
And what she did is she took on as a practice to write to that person individually, not get into a kind of discussion online, which probably would go nowhere. But to write to that person individually and just say, look, I think, you said this thing and I think that's quite hurtful or whatever it was. And we started doing that in the community here in which I live. And we've had 100% success rate of being able just to engage with people personally rather than getting into these scraps online, but actually engaging with people personally. I mean, obviously it helped that she knew and we know people's, how to contact people directly, but I think, and just engaging with people rather than getting in scraps online has been very, very successful as a way to just connect, and people have usually taken down their original post.
Wow, great, great. All right. Another question. This you said Tara had just been on the retreat with you. Is she from
Yeah,
London?
she
Okay,
is.
this is a question from Tara in London. It says, I love the bit about does it bring you simplicity or complexity? Does it bring you violence or not? Could you please share the quote again and where we can read it, where we can find it ourselves?
Yeah, so luckily I just saw that in the chat, so I have posted something. I don't know if, well, I don't know how it's got out, but if it's got to everyone. But it's actually a discussion between the Buddha and his aunt, his maternal aunt, who brought him up. You might remember, but it's in What is the Dharma as well, and I should be able to understand when I say it's Anguttara Nikaya 8.53. But it's it's a little discussion where he actually goes through 8 ways you can tell it's the Dhamma or his teachings or even the truth, because his teachings, he was talking about the way things are. And how to recognize his teachings or the truth. And they're mostly centered around a simple life or a more kind of complexity and a more complex life, really. And then there's this last 2 terms which I feel really inspired by, and I reflect on a lot, which is, does it lead to shupa or beauty or purity? It's shubharati is the Pali. So does it lead you to delight in beauty, or duparati, which is violence? Does it lead you to delight in violence? Which I think is very, very important, because no matter how good your ideas are, no matter how intellectual or well reasoned they are, if it leads you to delight in violence, you're going wrong. And that's true for Buddhism or for any other sort of thought, really, path of thought. So it's very, very, in a way that gives me a lot of confidence. But also beauty is such Shubha is also a very rich word in Pali. It also means beautiful and pure. And it's that vision of reality where you see all beings as growing and developing. One of the things the Buddha said, he said, what Sangharakshita said, he said, the Buddha's knowledge is not a cold and analytical knowledge. He saw with warmth, he saw with beauty, he saw with metta. What is more, he saw all beings as being pure, beautiful, shubha. So he saw with warmth, he saw with feeling, he saw all beings as being beautiful, shubha, which also means pure. So it's really in line with the way the Buddha saw all beings. And if it leads you to see people like that and to delight in that as well, to enjoy that, to feel that that's present and kind of growing, then that's the truth. That's more in line with the truth.
Mm, mm. I thought that you were at one point, I can't remember if it was the same point where you made this quote, but you made a reference to emotional reflection. I've never seen anybody talk about emotional reflection before. I haven't heard that term before, but I really liked it. I thought, oh, that's really, it captures something different, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's also, allowing reflection as a practice is allowing something to go much more than a kind of reasoning out, a reasoned reflection. It's allowing the reflection to drop in to your consciousness, which is more akin to Buddhist meditation. One of the things that I've been doing is I've been because we're trying to raise money to move, I've been writing a diary, a meditation diary, and people have been sponsoring me to do that. And when I was doing the last retreat, the Transcendental Principle retreat, I was reflecting every day on a line from the Survey of Buddhism. And you do, it's different when you read a book and you make notes on it and even decide to help teach it to other people or explain it to other people. It's very different to do that than when you sort of turn it over in your mind or let it kind of sink in, and even feeling it somatically, feeling it in the body, not just in the head, but how does that feel? How does that take shape in my being? And sometimes quite some things that were quite new and unexpected, some new reflections came on the basis of a text I know extremely well, that I've read many times before. So I think, yeah, an emotional reflection, it's not just about having. I remember once I studied philosophy and religious studies at university, and we had a retreat, and I remember the students, they were all discussing Marxist economics around the dinner table at the end of our dinner, and they were also sort of talking about the need for sort of Marxist economics and getting rid of the ruling class and all this sort of stuff. And they were all sitting there chatting, and they weren't. No one got up to help with the washing up. And I was listening to them have this conversation. And I was kind of walking around the back, clearing up all their plates. And I thought, well, I know where you could start. Workers' rights, communes, and communal living, and all this sort of thing.
Yeah,
Start
absolutely.
now.
And speaking of your diary, Tanya from Berlin was saying that you wrote in your diary recently, you talked about watching news for a reason. Yep. And that to know what is possible in the world, remembering that we cannot fix samsara. And Tanya asks, how do we stay engaged and updated without being overwhelmed by horrified anxiety?
Yeah, I think that's it's a good point. And it's a choice that I've made quite consciously, actually. I think partly because, well, I don't know if my mom and dad are still here, but I'm the daughter of journalists, and and the news has always been very alive in my household. But I think I made a decision actually when I was 10 years old. So when I was 10 years old, I was watching the TV, and some people might remember the Zeebrugge disaster, which shows you how old I am, where the ferry doors were left open and the ferry sank. And a lot of people died that day. And I chose very consciously well, I was 10 years old, so how conscious can you be? But I remember watching it and thinking that I was going to go and get on with my breakfast, and my life was unchanged. But there were all these people whose lives were fundamentally changed because their loved ones had died that day. And I remember I found that very weird. And I decided that I would live a life that took account of other people's suffering. And I made that decision very, very consciously at that time, that I would never forget the suffering of others. So I think that what enables me to do that, to sort of fulfill that vow that I made when I was 10 years old, is Buddhist practice, because it gives you a context of how suffering arises and how it ceases. And I think I can only save myself sort of horrified anxiety by really, really having the confidence that there is also the possibility of liberation from suffering, and there's the possibility of a path to liberation. And
Mm, mm,
sort of and the means by which to turn
you, you're breaking up, Vajratara. Maybe just stop for a second.
the back. Am I back?
There we go. We might have you. No. Well, while we're waiting for her to come back online. One of the things that kind of can help, I think, with horrified anxiety, from my perspective, is also the practice of mudita. I think it makes a big difference for me when I get into horrified anxiety. I think it's a bit because I'm taking on the problems of the world in a very centralized way, and I kind of realize my smallness in the midst of it all, and how little control I have over it all. But I think when you start to rejoice in other people's merits, and you start to realize that you're part of a community, and that there's a lot of people out there that are also responding with compassion and trying to make for a better world, trying to be this fourth sight. I think that kind of helps shift the horrified anxiety. Aha, there's Vajratara. She's back.
Yeah. Yep, I'm back. I'm now in the office. Just I thought I'd just run for it.
Wow, you did well. That was good.
Yeah.
So you were talking about where was it? It was the horrified anxiety. You just started to answer that question about how to prevent ourselves from being overwhelmed. And I think what you were talking about was the possibility, I mean, basically of insight and kind of in a way becoming bigger, becoming selfless in a way as holding it. I think you're headed in that direction, but why don't I let you
Yeah.
go? Yeah.
Well, I was telling a story. I don't know if I got that far. I was sort of telling the story about this kind of commitment I made when I was 10, not to.
Yes.
Yeah, I did say that. So,
Yes.
yeah, that in a way that I think the only thing that can really hold that, if you're going to read the news and really sort of, in a way, expose yourself to the sort of horrors that's possible, is to also have a complete confidence that another way of being is possible. And it's only through the through the Dharma as a vessel, of having another possibility, that you can really take it on. So I don't think I'd be able to look at the news without horrified anxiety if I didn't also have a confidence that another way of being is possible, that liberation is possible, and that also if I didn't have the commitment in my life to making sure that I was doing my best to contribute to the world. I think that's what enables me to sort of see those things, is knowing that I am in my own way contributing to contributing to peace and love in the world, and contributing to a different way. So it's the Dharma that's really enabled me to have a context for looking at those things and seeing how suffering is brought into being, and seeing where it ends.
Mm, mm, mm.
But
You
I
do,
know that's
yeah. Go
not
ahead.
possible for everyone.
No, but that kind of you need to get bigger, don't you, in a way? But I guess the irony of it is that you don't get bigger in a quantitative way. You just sort of like you see through things a bit,
Yeah.
and identify. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. We've got a few minutes left. There was someone asks about if you could speak more about imaginative identification in regard to meditation, and how in breaking the self-other barrier down, we can help them be a more help it to be a more permanent part. So I guess what they're asking is, well, I mean, in a way, how can we make that imaginative identification? You drop in and out of it. What can we do to make it more permanent, I guess, is what they're asking.
Yeah, so I suppose we've got the practice, I didn't mention it by name, but we've got the practice of the development of loving kindness, which is the metta bhavana. And I think there's different phases you can go through with the metta bhavana. The first is that you bring to mind other people, and you've got yourself, and you've got what's happening with you, and you imagine what's happening, imagine your way into their lives, and you wish them well. You can start moving it on as well, though, as a more insight practice, by seeing that you're not fixed and separate. So, and they're not fixed and separate. So it's not like you sending metta to someone else. And you can sort of imagine your way into this more anukampa quality, this resonating with life. Eventually, if you do the practice long enough, it goes into the stage of what's called free floating metta, or metta without a subject or object at all. Just metta is expansiveness, loving kindness is expansiveness. But I think the main thing is that you just keep doing the metta bhavana, and eventually it undermines this kind of self other dichotomy. In my own experience, how that looks is that self and other just is increasingly an odd construct to have in one's mind. And you become more attuned to the consciousness itself as loving, as responsive to other living beings. Rather than this kind of I send loving kindness to you. It becomes, there is awareness is sort of has a loving and responsive quality to it. And human beings aren't fixed and they aren't separate. And we are just part of life. Yeah.
Right. There's that lovely section from the Vimalakirti Nirdesha, isn't it, where he talks about the great love.
Yeah, well, in every
Yeah.
school of Buddhism, you will have the insight increasing as you come closer to reality. Love is more spontaneous and set free from this sort of self and other dichotomy.
Yeah. So I've got 1 minute, and at the risk of kind of going over, which we will, but there's something you said in the middle of your talk about wrong choices and feeling remorse, but then you also then follow that up by saying it gives us information about who we want to be. And I really like the idea that we should be open to making mistakes. We should be open to falling short, because it opens us to being more too. If we're afraid to make mistakes, then we'll probably won't make as much progress as we could. But I was kind of wondering where you were going with that when you said that, or if you have any further thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think the problem is that when we feel remorse, it's such an intense and uncomfortable feeling that we try and get away from the intense and uncomfortable feeling. And that's why it's good to talk about it with someone, because it enables us to have that uncomfortable feeling. But as I said, it's also giving you some information. It's sort of telling you, oh, I have an ethical ideal, I have a value that's very important to me, and I didn't act in line with it. So when you talk to someone about it, you're enabled to see, okay, well, what was the value that's important to me? And what did I do to not act in line with it? And could I do something different next time? How could I act in line with my value in more appropriately at another time? So I think it's, from a Buddhist point of view, even though it's a painful feeling to have, it's extremely spiritually positive to feel remorse and not to shy away from it, because yeah, it's just told us what we value, and we can use that as information to do something differently next time. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks. All right. Well, thank you very much for your talk tonight. I think it was fabulous. So I thought that there's a lot in that, with the idea, the principle, the method, and the support. The principle of imaginative identification, the method of meditation, and the support of other people. you've mentioned a little bit about support of other people. Do you want to say anything more about that? Just because that's quite important, is it, in our movement and the emphasis Bhante gave on Kalyana Mitrata and spiritual friendship?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. I think it's very, very difficult to practice ethics to a sort of deeper levels. And from the Buddhist tradition, that is, you practice it all the way to enlightenment, and it's well and beyond. It's just spontaneous that enlightenment. So you're really talking about something that's limitless. But the ethical practice is limitless. We just need to make sure that we are around people who are ethically positive and that we have an opportunity to talk to them about our lives and the choices that we're making in our lives. And where we get that is our local Buddhist center, online events, going to retreats, all those things are absolutely necessary. Keeping on listening to talks, and reading about ethics, some very, very good books about Buddhist ethics. But yeah, just talking to people. So, and we'll need to do that. We'll need to be in contexts where we can do that. And that's most often at our local Buddhist center. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the other thing about the context of the Sangha is that if the bodhicitta is going to arise, Bhante taught us that arises within a community of people, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's within the Sangha that this magical thing that is is the kind of the nectar for the world's sufferings is going to arise amongst a community of people.
Yes, exactly. And also, it's going to arise, there'll be a transformation. What that means is a complete transformation of consciousness that happens in the collective. Um, and also, if we want to help the world, we also have to act together. What you can do as an individual is fairly limited, but what you can do as a community have a much, much more impact. We've really seen that in India, where whole communities practicing Buddhism can make really quite a large difference, and also kind of provide a greater context for other people who want to practice ethics at a deeper level.
And you could imagine too, like when you talk about the order is the fourth sight, you can imagine walking into a village in India where, the whole community is practicing and has been practicing the Dharma and is communicating and practicing together in the ways we've spoken about. It would have a tangible feel, wouldn't it?
Oh, it definitely does. It definitely does. I have a friend who was just taken by taxi in India, actually through I can't remember where it was, Pune, and he was taken through these areas, and he said the taxi driver was saying, "Look, this area is not very safe. Shouldn't really go here. Um, don't go here, any time, day or night." And then he said, "Oh, but this is a Buddhist area." He said, "You'll be safe there anytime, day or night. You can go there. You'll be safe."
Wow.
And
That's
that
so
wasn't
lovely, isn't
Buddhist.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah,
in a
yeah.
way,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to, and then you can feel that with Buddhist centers anywhere, that they are what Sangharakshita called an oasis in the wilderness. That you go there and you feel like you've just walked into somewhere that's a bit different, that has a kind of clarity and open quality, even as soon as you walk in. And I think that's what we really need to provide for people.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, speaking of India, that's a good point to make about these talks. We're doing these talks mainly to kind of get, I don't know, for college members to give talks and for people to meet the college and stuff like that. But also and to evoke what we offer as a community, to try and think about that and inspire one another in this way. I particularly like the Bodhisattva ideal. I've been kind of reflecting on that a bit myself. So I'm really pleased to hear your thoughts. So you give me a lot to think about. But also we are inviting donations, not for the college, but we'd like to turn those donations towards the India Dharma Trust, which you've been involved with, haven't you?
I have, yes, and with my dear friend Amoga Siddhi and Amrit Deep, who are somewhere here or have been on this Zoom meeting. Yes, I've been chair for many years, actually. We're now partnered with FutureDharma Fund, so they do a lot of the work for us. But yeah, it's been one of the great boons and pleasures of my life is to be involved with the Indian ordination teams and the Dharma workers in India, the order members in India, through the India Dhamma Trust.
Yeah. So Casa Jyoti's put a link in the chat where you can donate, and if you want to. And in underneath that, if you do donate there, all the money will be split between Dhammachakra and the India Dharma Trust. So the India Dharma Trust supports the public preceptors in India and the whole ordination training process in India. And of course, we've been hosted tonight by the Dhammachakra, the Buddhist Center Online. Zach has been our technical support. He's been fabulous. And so half the money, half the donations go to continue the online presence and that infrastructure. So there's also a link in the chat from Akasa Jyoti with respect to signing up for the Preceptor College mailing list. So you'll get notice of future events and other news from the college there. So do please sign up for the mailing list, and please do give, because I do know that our brothers and sisters in India, they do really need our support. You know, it's a much different game over there. Money is harder to come by, and if we can give a little bit, that's going to go a long ways there. So please do consider giving a donation. All right, well, it's a couple of minutes early. I kind of feel like I can't quit early. But do you have any last words that you'd like to leave people with tonight, or I don't know,
Yeah,
anything?
well, I could just say I just really encourage people to just to live an ethical life. I know it sounds really simple, but to have confidence to do that and to have confidence that actually the ethical life is limitless. You know, we can constantly deepen our ethical practice all the way, that vision of lotuses and resonating with the life in others. And that living an ethical life, you know, I think sometimes ethics can sound a little bit limited or a little bit boring. And really, it's the most wonderful life. It's the best thing that you can do, and not to underestimate both your impact that you can have on others just by being an example of sanity and compassion in the world, but also we can tend to underestimate our own potential and our own ability to practice ethics. So don't underestimate yourself, your practice, what you can do for the world, but just keep on with the ethical practice, and you really have made a beautiful offering in a very difficult time. I can't stress enough how important that is.
And I think a lot of times too, when we think about ethics, we think about effort and restraint and stuff like that. But Buddhist ethical life is also a really joyful life, isn't it? I mean, when the heart turns towards love and compassion and contentment, it turns, you know, joy arises naturally, you know. So it's a really joyful life. So yep. So thank you very much, Vajratara. I've been prompted to remind all of you that the next talk is on the 22nd of June with Yana Vacha on the theme of Kshanti, patience, tolerance, or forbearance. So you can always go to the Buddhist Center Online, buddhistcenteronline.com/Cohen, and you can find details for that. So we hope to see you again in late June. So in the meantime,
thank you very much, Ratnavyuha, for hosting. And I don't know what time it is in New Zealand.
10:30. It's quite manageable still.
It's manageable, but still, it's really great to see you, and thank you so much for hosting us so well, and just for being around.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. My pleasure. It took me a while to get my feet underneath me, but I think I recovered. All right, Vajratara.